1983, that was Suddenly Last Summer from the Motels here on WFDU FM. And the Motels, of course, from Los Angeles, had a string of songs that you guys know, like Total Control and Only the Lonely. And the Motels are back. In fact, they're playing next Saturday night at B.B. King's in New York City. And on the phone with us tonight is Martha Davis, lead singer of the Motels, who not only have a new record, they have two new records out at the same time.
Three, actually.
Three?
Yes. It just sort of happened by accident. It was a convergence last year of musical things that had started, and then they just sort of all came about at about the same time. So, what are you going to do? Just release them, I guess.
A burst of creativity.
Well, it's not really a burst. I usually burst most of the time. I have like hundreds and hundreds of songs. The hard part is getting the songs from the iPod, which is now my new Walkman, into the finished recorded state. And that's the part, because I have recently moved up to Oregon. Mm-hmm. My band is still down in Los Angeles, so it involves a little bit of travel, although I'm starting to put together I'm trying to put bands together everywhere I go so that I'll always have easy access, you know?
Right.
So it's just a matter of, like, those things came together. There were 3 albums. One of them was called Beautiful Life, A Slight Miscalculation, which is a very, very dark, introspective look at my mom's suicide of many, many years ago. But it's just like, there's always a song for her on every album, and I just went, damn it, I'm just going to give her the whole album.
Wow.
And it also ended up sort of mirroring the dissolving marriage that I'm just going through right now. So it was a very dark album. It's a conceptual album, should be listened to from top to bottom, probably with a glass of red wine next to you or something. I don't know. But and the other album that came out was an album called Clean, Modern, and Reasonable, which was actually done for Australia, and it was remakes of all the old Motel songs. When I say remakes, I mean remakes. I mean complete new arrangements, different keys. Like, it was really fun, and so we did that one. And then in the meantime, there was this other album that was happening at the same time, and because it was always, you know, it was getting confusing.
Right.
It would always be like, no, not that album, this album. And so that album became called This. So this is more poppy. It's more co-writing with the guys in my band, that kind of thing. And it's really fun. So they're very different albums, all 3 of them.
You know, Martha, I want to go back to the beginning of the band because I think people have a misconception about the Motels. They assume that the band started around 1979 or 80, but in actual fact, it was as far back as 1971, right?
Yeah. The first, we weren't called the Motels, but the original band, first gig was on Halloween night, 1971.
Wow.
Yeah, and boy, that was a freaky gig. It was in San Francisco, and I think the entire place was on acid. There was a naked man painted blue dancing in front of me.
Oh, that's 1971, all right.
Yeah. And that was our first gig, and then that band moved down to Los Angeles in 1975 and changed our name from the Warfield Foxes to the Angels of Mercy for a very short period of time. And when we were on our way to our first gig at Barney's Beanery, driving down Santa Monica, and I was bitching about the name, going, we should pass out soup if we're going to be called Angels of Mercy. And Dean Chamberlain, the guitar player in the band, looked up and saw we're driving down. Santa Monica used to be where all the motels were. There's something different there now, but he looked up and he said, what about the Motels? And I said, yeah.
You know, I read this story that when the Motels first got signed to Capitol Records, you split up.
That was hilarious, as all rock and roll stories are when you actually get away from them.
Right.
And put a few years in between them. We were playing a place called the Starwood, which no longer exists in Hollywood. And, you know, we used to open for Van Halen there before Van Halen was signed. Mm-hmm. And this one night we had this gig, and after the show, I get this note, or one of the people working there comes over and says, there's this guy, Carter, from Capitol Records, he wants to talk to you. And I'm like, oh my God. And I go over and meet with him, and he's really interested in the band. He really is like, you know, and I'm like, oh my God, we're gonna get a deal. So I go backstage to the guys, and I say, this guy from Capitol Records, he's really interested. And Robert, our drummer, says, well, that's nice, but I'm quitting the band. And so the other guys go, damn it, well, we'll have to get another drummer. And I said, no, because I'm quitting the band too. because we had just gotten to a point where, and I think part of it was the opening for Van Halen, but half the guys, Dean and Chuck, really wanted to go that route because that's where all the babes were.
Oh,
and
I
I
see.
was listening to a lot of Brian Eno and David Bowie, and I wanted to be more, outside, and so did Robert, the drummer. So we decided we'd forge on by ourselves. But Robert and I are both complete idiot creative brains and have no way of organizing or, like us trying to put a band together was just ridiculous. It was a case of the very blind leading the very blind. So by the time the band actually got reformed, which I think we broke up in 76, something like that, and then reformed in 79, maybe late 78. By that time, Robert was out of the band, and Jeff Gerard had joined, who was very much a logistics man and could organize things. And the new motels, within 6 months, Carter showed up again, the same guy. and after a little bidding war and stuff, we actually did get signed to Capitol Records.
That also coincided with the birth of MTV, and for a while there, you were also a video star. That must have been unexpected.
It's amazing what happens. It was great fun. It really was a golden age in so many ways. I mean, I tell, like, all the guys in my band are real young and real cute. And I keep telling them about these days when record companies had this thing called artist development. Do you know that it was 4 albums before we had a hit in the United States?
Wow.
Because there was the Motels, the first album, Careful. The third album was an album that wasn't even released, and then the fourth album had Only Lonely on it.
Right.
So, and this was a label that cared about their artists, and they worked them, and they just figured you put time in and you get something out. That is gone.
Yeah,
but,
that doesn't happen anymore at all.
No. And when we first started doing videos, it was also just amazingly fun. I mean, the first 2 videos that I did were with Russell McKay.
Sure.
And he's brilliant, a brilliant Australian guy, and just mad as he can be, just too fabulous. And we did both the Take the L video and the Only Lonely video, which is the one that I actually got an award for Best Female Performance in it.
Sure.
And for $60,000, I think, for both of them. Those days did not last very long. By the time I was, things were rolling around. And I really liked, well, let me put this right. I don't like video. I do not like being on television. I do not like the video.
Right.
I love film. Film will make you look nice. Video kind of, I mean, it was great. It was a wonderful time in some ways.
But the Motels in that incarnation had a long run up till about 86, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure when the actual end of it. I guess the Policy album was in 89, so probably, 86, 87, it was all starting to crumble. There's the politics. I mean, the business was changing a lot, and you could see it in, like we were going through the thing where the actual industry and Capitol Records was definitely changing. There had been a lot of political play where it's kind of like, well, Martha, you're the singer and the songwriter, you should be the one, and I was just holding on to the band going, no, it's my band, it's my band. And then getting hooked up with producers that were very sort of megalomaniacal and them hiring their own guys, and there's you can't help but fracture the relationships of the band, and so pretty soon it was it was just, and then the money ran out because the money kept being spent on like big videos and big records, and every producer of course bought 3 houses, and I never bought one by then, so I don't know. It's just sort of the way the biz got.
Well,
I think it was always a little on the crooked side, but it was, they loved music. In the old days, the guys that worked for the companies were real music lovers, and there was it wasn't this investment broker sensibility that you have nowadays.
Right.
That, where the music is the last thing they think of.
Well, it's sort of a catch-22 because you wouldn't have had that meddling if you didn't have songs that were kind of big. I mean, Take the L and Only the Lonely, right?
Yeah.
And once they saw, money,
Yeah, that's true. And I am, because of my personality, it's taken me years. I've never been a confident person. I've been I'm so lucky to have the talent that I've had ever since I was a kid. I've played guitar since I was 8, and I started writing songs when I was 15. It's always been with me, and it will never go away. And it's almost a curse. I have so many songs. I'm going, I have to slow down and not write them because they'll never see the light of day. So I try to, and that's not a problem. It's really not a problem. I shouldn't say it like that, but
right.
But because I'm of that ilk that is, basically an insecure person with not a lot of confidence, and found my art by means of, needing solace and needing to be alone and somehow find comfort, so I would lock myself in my room with my guitar, This turned into, all of a sudden, you're on stage, and when the powers that be would tell me that I needed to do this or do that or do whatever, I would just do it,
Right.
No questions asked, because I always thought of myself as not knowing what I was doing, because I'm completely self-taught and completely, I really don't know what I'm doing, to be perfectly honest, which is the fun part, I realize.
Well, you must have gained some confidence a few years ago because you reformed a version of the Motels.
Yes.
And that's what you're doing now.
Yes.
And also releasing albums, too.
Yes.
And when did that come about? That was sometime in the late 90s?
Well, yeah, it started by some fluke. Like an old promoter called me, some gal that I knew from years ago, and said, "There's a gig, I've been looking for you, there's a gig for $25,000. I'm like, and I hadn't been playing, I'd never stopped writing, and I'd been co-writing with people and doing various things, nothing really successful and I had really lost my confidence after leaving Capitol, because by the time I got through all those albums and out the other end, what I had intentionally started to want to do, my artistic intent in going in, had totally morphed, and by the time I got done, I was really shaken by how far I had departed from what I originally intended on doing, artistically, and it kind of broke my heart, and I realized it was nobody's fault but my own for letting, for just succumbing to whatever anybody wanted, and so I kind of, for the only time in my life that I went a year without writing a song was right after I left Capitol Records, and for a year I didn't even write one song, which is just weird. And I started just upholstering furniture and refinishing furniture and doing things where I could see instant gratification,
Right.
Just got away from it completely. And then when I get this phone call, I was living up in Ventura, and I was like, well, maybe I should put a band together. And I started all over. I went all the way back in time. It was like I stepped in a time machine. I went out, I found these young guys, really young, never had any album deals, they were basically in just garage bands, garage bands.
Mm-hmm.
So, and by this time, I'd played with the heaviest hitters of all, but instead, I wanted to go back and do it all over again for some reason. I didn't do this consciously, but I think in my heart, I wanted to go through it again and this time not lose track of it, because I was dealing with a lot when I was going through it anyway. It was like after my mom's death, my dad's death, and trying to raise the kids, and it was crazy. The whole time I was having this quote-unquote success, I was a wreck, So this time I started all over, and as I would get confidence, I would need not a bigger band, but a better caliber of player, and I would just sort of keep changing up and changing up and changing up, till finally I got this lineup that I started about 5 years ago with the drummer Eric Gardner, and then Clint Walsh came in to play bass, but ended up on guitar, and then Nick Johns came in to play bass, but then he ended up on keyboards,
Right.
and then John Siebels from Eve 6 came in, and he's now my bass player, when he's not my guitar player. These guys are amazing.
Now, where, if someone wants to find you online,
Yes.
where could they go to get not only get your 3 new albums, which is this incredible burst? It's almost unheard of that you'd have 3 records at the same time, but also find out about you and where you're going to be and all that stuff.
We need to go to themotels.com.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's simple enough.
Or marthadavis.com, or the MySpace. Actually, if you go to themotels.com, it'll take you to 2 other MySpace pages, and we can,
Right. I see. It's myspace.com/themotels.
Yeah.
And that not only has a sampling of some new music and some older stuff, but also tour dates and everything else, and people can leave comments, and
they can.
You know, I got to ask you, and once again, if you just joined us, we're talking to Martha Davis of The Motels. I got to ask you about that early 80s sound, which you now hear in so many new bands and new records.
Yeah, and it's really funny because I've commented on this. But first of all, we like to refer to them as the won't go aways.
Ah, there we go.
And one of the things that's really funny is because I'll hear bands and I'm like, wow, that sounds just like Blondie, or wow, that sounds just like so and so, or I mean, they really emulate certain bands, you know, not just sounds, but you can hear definite bands, you know.
Right.
And which is funny because back in the 80s, one of the things that was most important to all of us that were involved in that scene was to not sound like anybody else.
Right.
Like Oingo Boingo did not sound like Chrissie Hynde, did not sound like, you know, I mean, everybody had their own unique thing, and the dreaded thing was if you actually sounded like someone else, and then you're in trouble. So it's kind of funny now to hear the sound-alikes and go, oh, well, maybe there's just enough time passed between us. But it's great. I mean, it's a great homage to some really wonderful times and some really great music, some really bad music too, and some crazy and bad clothing.
Well, once again, everybody, next Saturday night, B.B. King's in New York City. Go see the Motels. They're playing. And Martha, it's been great having you on the show. We're going to hear a song from one of your new albums, this. Yeah. We're going to hear The Day That Won't Go Away, and thanks for being on the show.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.